Welcome to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and her guests bring you insightful conversations to awaken heart and soul consciousness. Come journey with us exploring the meaningfulness of astrology's energetic cycles and get ready to understand your path in the cosmic roots of the stars.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sue Minahan, Sue Rose Minahan, and this is Talk Cosmos for August 30th, at the very end of the month. And we're looking at one of two very powerful aspects that are happening really on the same day. But this one is Mars in Cancer, protective, Cancer in a square, an action-oriented, motivated, driven square to Saturn. Just the two of them, it's really a very dynamic. We'll find out. I have lots to talk about it. And it'll be just myself today with the summer occasions. That's how it's working. And I really look forward to it because it's not so much about the charts. It's really going to be about the storyline, Saturn time, where it began at some relative point in our modern consciousness, coming up to now. Some of it we may not remember. It's a little before our time, but not that far back, our parents or somebody's. Okay, I'll begin. Thanks.
Talk Cosmos engages unique events during the 3rd and 4th weeks of the month, featuring a myriad of new and returning guests. Joining host and founder Sue Rose Minahan, they co-create to explore and contemplate a wide spectrum of potent subjects. Embark on today's topic within our panorama of guests and insights as we welcome the astrologers for this conversation.
Well, back to myself. Yes, it's Mars Action Squares Saturn in these cardinal signs. One is water, one is fire. We've gone through that dynamic quite a bit. And it makes steam. It's really life generating. And we'll find out how that works. Looking at these planets out there in the sky, Saturn is not quite as big as Jupiter, and it's just a little further out, but it is enormous. And it has rings. We've always known it's had rings. In fact, now we know Uranus has rings. And then Mars is on the external side of Earth, whereas we have the two planets, the personal planets, as we really call them, along with Mars, but they're interpersonal with Mercury and Venus. But Mars is our action, and it that drive that we carry within us to motivate. Everything in the world is action. Every element of change, of energy that gets transformed needed to have some activating ingredient, whether it was temperature, whatever it is. My scientific little thoughts go on, but I don't want to deviate here. So in other words, what Saturn does, though, it's their relationship astrologically is pretty critical, because Saturn in vibrational astrology strips away everything superfluous. In modern astrology, which I am still integrating into because I'm founded by that. And it does translate, and these two translate well, but I like to bring in that focus with vibrational astrology because they have researched over so many charts and people. But it looks at, you could say, the structure of something. What is really important in it? Well, in Aries, it might be on your travel. What do you absolutely need? If you're going to have identity, what is critical to yourself? There's all these ways that we can look into that kind of association between the two. And Mars is the drive that we have. And it's in Cancer, which has everything to do with protection. We know it has to do about home, and it has to do about our emotions and our family, our mother in particular, as we think about. And who is that family? Who is that? How are we being nurtured by that mother? Are we doing it ourselves? And how are we protecting that whole elements. So when we go forward, it's not quite with the same bravado that perhaps others signs would have. It's more held back for good reason, because we're scooting and scouring out, you could say, the terrain to see what's essential. What do I need that's going to help build this protective element? So Mars is represented by the crab. The crab moves between the tides of water. It's an emotional sign, and it's fluid. It's not the same today as it is tomorrow or even in an hour, because the moon is a quick moving around the earth, and so it has all these different phases. So we're looking at what our attachments are. And attachments are important, and our habits are important, but maybe they're there out of a defense, protecting us from something that is no longer important, or else we need to take a risk and open up to something. And eventually it's always about the heart and the home. So in looking at that energy of itself, Aries, again, in vibrational astrology, is honesty. And you have to stop and think, okay, honesty, that means because the direction that you're forging ahead in the direction of something, and it's more than that. Well, with squares, they all relate as far as we think in modern astrology, but who am I that really is deep important, that I need to take that courageous step forward to be my autonomy, my identity, myself, because you're pioneering and you're forging ahead. And of course, in that path, the wisdom learns that maybe it's not quite the right angle, or something else needs to be incorporated, or else it's going to take more time to work it out. And so it can be quite frustrating. And that anger comes up, and anger can be channeling. Sometimes if one learns to channel it, it's very constructive. So it's not something to be totally viewed at in a more moralistic approach. And of course, understanding that anger eventually can destroy. And if that's your intent, so be it. But that's just talking about anger itself. But Aries would rather walk away if someone isn't understanding where they're coming from, because it's honest, it's coming from them, and they want the other person to be honest too. So in this, with Saturn, it's saying, what is essentially important to you, your identity? And have you got it together? And do you see where I'm coming from? Because if you don't, maybe we just can't, it's been pleasant, etc. not to, but so much for it. And when we look at a square, which they're in, that's 90 degrees, and this is coming from their conjunction, which I'm trying to think of when that was. But anyway, it happens every 2 years from the conjunction, but not in these signs, because Mars, its cycle is 2 years. It goes around. So it will conjunct at or square. It will square twice if it's going to square, an applying square, and as it's departing, ready to return on its cycle after it's culminated, it has a final square. But regardless, these squares are where you have a drive within you to express something that's very deep, that you want to change. It's an action on the outside, and you want to imprint it on the world. These are words that Linda Barry spoke just recently in a lecture that she gave down at Atlanta's astrology group. And Linda Barry is of Astro Sleuth, and she is a researcher and instructor for vibrational astrology, directly taught by David Cochran. What she says is that the world operates differently than when you started. So a square really is a motivationally organized instrument that makes a difference between us just dreaming and manifesting something. But it has its limits too, because it's really very self-oriented. It's like, where am I coming from? And these two archetypes between the Mars and the Saturn have in history really culminated, because when you have an aspect, it carries over until the next aspect. And so there's this interplay with many, many forces. But we're looking at that pinpoint. Okay, what did it say? These are the times that Mars in Cancer squares Saturn in Aries that have occurred one time. It doesn't have a retrograde period in these. It's one time, but it lasts because Saturn will conjunct with Mars as it goes through other signs. But for Aries, which is so pivotal here, Mars rules Aries for one reason too. It was 1908, and it was early in their degrees, because it's the same degree, but in different cardinal signs. In this case, again, it's a fire and the water, or the water, because the water is with the slower planet, which is Mars, and the fire in the faster planet, Mars, and the slower planet will be Saturn. So it was 8 degrees and 17 minutes in 1908. In 1938, because remember, Saturn's a 30-year cycle, and so when it comes back to Mars in this sign of Cancer, it was in 1938, and it had moved along to 17 degrees 24 degrees. Then in 1968, another 30 years, it was at the end of the archetypal 30 degrees, which is 25 degrees and 29 minutes in Cancer Aries. Then in 1996, just shy of that 30 years, but still, it's a 20 for a return with Saturn. It's 28 to 29, 30 years, because it's a 2.5-year cycle itself. So here we're at the beginning. So it's a little earlier, and it's at 7 degrees, 8 minutes of the two cardinal signs. And this year it is at 13 degrees, 39 minutes, and that'll be on the 31st of, or no, it's on the 1st, September 1st. Looking at these is a storyline, and just jumping from is 114 years from 1908 to 2014. That's a long time. I had grandparents that were alive back then, but they're long gone. And that storyline, it impacts our cultural dynamics, and it involves everything that we're coping with these days. Time, space, involving on a cultural basis of entertainment, work, the roles that we have within ourselves, our identity, and home. Cancer is home. That protective shell that we create, that womb to nourish ourselves and be close with our intimate people. And we have moved literally from Earth base to the advent of air with the web and AI. And we'll kind of look at that, a diagram through these 6, it's 5, 1908, 1938, 1960. 68, yes. Then it flips to 1996, or not flip, but then 2026. Okay. Going back, looking at these themes, one of them was political. There's technological, political, that were very evident. And in 1908, Theodore Roosevelt did the Antiquities Act to declare the Grand Canyon a national monument, which served later to make it a national park in 1919. And that's where you could say the actions, and in his vision, a protection of land, a format of depth, was for all, the protection of the nation, very Cancerian nation. Also in that year of 1908 was the political transitions. And there was the 4th Summer Olympic Games in London, and they actually standardized the competition rules. It had been lapsed from Greece for thousands, long time. And this is the fourth. It was every 4 years. And there was also an officiating ceremony. And that's important because it just happens that in that first one that we're mentioning, 1908 and 2026, which you will be discussing next week with Laura Tad, will be that Saturn not only is squaring Mars, but it's also trine Jupiter. Which the trine is going to extend for a whole year 3 times. But this square is a one-time shot. Saying, okay, here's the action. Now you guys keep working on it. And amazingly, it just amazes me to see if there's a strong aspect, the dynamic events that occur. The Model T. Now, this is not the one on the assembly line. That was a little later, but it was still affordable. This dramatically changed what we're looking at between these 114 years of 30-year connections between Mars and Saturn, because now it took them several years, not years. It took people 3 months of their income. It was about $260. I mean, back then people only made 20 cents an hour, 45 cents an hour. It was dramatically different. But it changed the dynamics of space from your home, which had been the focus of entertainment, of life, survival, everything, to venturing out, which we'll expand on a little bit more. And also it helped the criminal. The criminal could get more getaways, which was sort of an interesting factor I had not realized, because the FBI was founded that year in July 26. And here you have, and at that table somewhere is the fellow, he was the Attorney General Bonaparte. And so it also indicated that onward. It's amazing how the law because you have law with Jupiter and you have structured fundamental with those 3 dynamics, it brings in a lot of law. So you'll see that in this era, there was quite a bit to do about law too. Here is the home front. This is just one picture on Canva. He's in, who knows who he is? I have no idea. But the home is out in the woods. And this is a pretty grand house, really, for that time. Could have been a very simple affair. But it was large enough that you could house your friends, your family, and really engage with everything that was important to you. But it was out of the Edwardian era. He died 2 years later in 10. But it was very buttoned up. People were protected. They were high collars for the men, and business, 3 layers, with a vest. And the women, all to the floor. Everything was covered. Nothing showed. It was very strict rules, very rule-oriented. So here you have Saturn and Aries that's saying, what about me? I have my identity. And things started to change. At that time, people would easily take horse and carriage to town. There was a Nickelodeon, which I'll show, and there was entertainment, although most entertainment was still tactile with music, sheet music on the piano, and everybody sang and danced. I think it was very intimately beautiful. And they would walk to town. So it was close-knit. To talk about that Cancerian bubble or that womb, you knew the people, the heartbeat of what was happening with everybody. And in town, though, getting a car changed the city, because here, look at this dirt road. It's just a mess when it rained. And so that began the protection of Mars and Cancer, looking at the structure of where we're headed in Mars with Saturn, saying we need to be safer to get there. We can't have big gully holes so that we fall off. And then again, how far are we extending it and connecting to other areas, the suburbs eventually? We need gas stations. It added more of productivity. There was a lot of productivity during that time. And I'm just bringing up the Mars trine at that moment because it expands and goes further quickly. And Laura and I next week will really focus on this particular aspect of this mutual moment that's happening within hours of itself. But here you have one lion looking, yes, you're with me. You're my audience and I love you and I'm giving everything to you. And the other is, nope, it's my way, highway, not giving anything, very egotistical. And that's the shadow side of it, just to add that dimension. Because here you have children was a huge emphasis during that time because of the Leo. Leo has everything to do about children. And there were work factories. The productivity was becoming a major factor. And they brought in the kid. And there was a man named Lewis Hine, Hinelewis was his first name. And he's documented that in 1908, he took these pictures of children in factories. Here you have cigar factory with boys and then girls working in a box factory. And as he said, there is work that profits children, and there is work that brings profit only to employers. The object of employing children is not to train them, but to get high profits from their work. And that's what they had misaligned here. And in fact, as a result of this, in the 30s, you'll see that high school was mandatory for everybody. And there were laws against child labor. Because here you have a shoebine, the old proverbial shoe shine boy. Well, yes, they made a living. And sewing factories. And there's a whole family of fairs. Or else it started in North Carolina. And here this girl is selling radishes. And then more, the newspaper boy. And the girls at the weaving factory, all 1908, which is this illumination. Again, it's a technology. It's showing something that was invented and putting application and protecting for protection of everybody. I think it's just amazing to see all that together. Well, within this period before 1938, when it conjunct again, the Model T did become a touring car, and it was the assembly line. Again, it's that emphasis from that action-motivated dynamic to say how Ford was very brilliant, that if you just do things in an assembly line, I know this impressed me tremendously as a kid. I thought, well, that's great. In fact, if you go to a restaurant these days and you see how the salad buffet is, you can do that at home. It really helps. You have all this chopped up and that chopped up, and you just add it together. Voila, great salad. But here it also defined who we are, that Aries that always is going back to self, because it is not the family lineage, which Saturn can hold on to and Cancer holds on to. Absolutely. My clan, me. But it was more, what am I buying? It's that sense of worth. Why does this not even matter? And the goods purchased. So it's the cars that you could show, or the music later that you could listen to, that also gathered you in this identity of a new sense of what the family identity was becoming. Oh, I must have repeated myself. Okay, no, I'm going backwards. Well, in that period of time that really shoots forward, we're centering on it because it's a seed point that matters for our consciousness here. Between 1905 and 13, which is only 8 years, there was a Nickelodeon. That's where for a nickel you went in and you saw moving pictures. And Netflix, there's this wonderful Titans, and they tell about all the shows, Fox, Universal, MGM, all of them, and the fights that they had during these times. It's so dramatic and dynamic, very innovative. Talk about living the dream of the nation. There's so much open opportunity that these, many times immigrants saw that could create. And the cinema is focused and so instrumental, because here it shifted from the home to the gathering in public places. They weren't that convenient. There were hard benches. It wasn't comfortable at all, but it was fascinating and everybody could talk about it. And eventually you could get there in a car, perhaps, if you didn't walk, and then visit other places. That whole dynamic, that energy of growth started to bloom. And it also provided people, because they were working and there were this production that was mass production. People had money and discretionary time. They could go visit, and be a spectator. It actually created the word spectator, according to a historian. But 1938, moving along this theme of where Cancer squares Saturn in Aries, we had experienced the Great Depression. And globally, it was a restrictive time. But it had forced the roles for men, it stripped them of their identity. They didn't have work. For women, because it was accepted to do domestic work or easy menial office work, they took on extra work. Everybody cut their pocketbook down. But child labor had ended that structure of Saturn. And school was protected. You had to go to school. You couldn't have them out there working. And people brought in people to live with them. So in a sense, it was engaging the community larger than just your family or the people you loved. It was renting out a room. So because that was a way of survival. Interestingly, in 1938, the War of the Worlds, it's legendary, isn't it? It's something that sticks with you. Some of these ideas in history just linger. They say the word, yes, the word does translate. Orson Welles, he was 23 years old, and he broadcasted this. He directed it too. But it happened to be competing with a very popular other show where there was a ventriloquist, which I remember early in the 50s with TV. It was fascinating. They had this guy talking, and who was talking? But here, people weren't listening to Orson Welles. So when they tuned in, they had no idea that it had been said, oh, this is his characterization of this book. They thought it was real, and the country panicked. But again, radio, which was the heyday of times then, we had moved from the technological advancing from movies into talkies, and the movies were central. The next year there was The Wizard of Oz and there was Gone with the Wind here in this nation, because now cinema is becoming global. You go to India, you go any country, they have wonderful movies that are impacting. Asia, I've watched tons of them. But at this point, it was really the United States that, with the help of the immigrants, that created this impactful, that started to expand our consciousness of what the world is and that sense of protection. Here, this really was, you could say, epitomized the fear of needing to protect ourselves. And it came at the heels of the Depression, where everybody was really focused, besides the fact of Europe that was having so many problems with, which became eminent, of course, with World War II and Hitler, with his deranged idea of what humanity was. So at this time, we lived through the punch card factories. Time was changing. Father Time, was really now more centralized as far as collective time, because you went to work, you sold your life at that period of time, but you had your own time when you left, and you could afford things to visit and to be entertained and whatnot. It was more structured. It was definitely structured. And the borders, after all this, then I'll take a break. The borders really fixed. There was this impending fear of what Hitler was doing. And this happens to be a map that was 1938. It's from Quizlet. It has interesting paraphernalia to ask about, trivia, I guess. But non-Europe, the Africa continent, Asia, and the Middle East, all because many countries, like for instance, French had territories and Italy had territories. And they tried to change some ideas of the perimeters. But Japan also had its, so many countries with their adjacent nations that they were working with they were establishing boundaries, which is so Saturn in Aries, and also for defense, and also Cancer for Mars, saying, this is mine, don't touch, or we're protecting it. Okay, come back. There's a lot more to say because we have 1968, 96, and then pulling it together to where we are. All right, see you in a minute.
While we take a break from this week's edition of Talk Cosmos, let's take a look at this cycle's archetype. We are currently in the yin period of Virgo. By leaving a cycle based on the creative manifested legacy of our highest creative form, the energy of Virgo completes the last sign below the horizon of the self and requires discernment to perfect oneself through the mental process of critical analysis. As a mutable earth sign duly ruled by Mercury, Virgo refines, heals, or fixes through daily routines, developing skills and services to control nature's chaos and maximize efficiency.
Talk Cosmos ignites conversations to awaken heart and soul consciousness every Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific. Listen on KKNW, stream the video on the Talk Cosmos YouTube channel and Facebook page, or catch the podcast on major podcast carriers. While you're there, remember to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Plus, sign up for the newsletter at talkcosmos.com to join our expedition and launch your week into the cosmic wonder.
This is Martha Norwalk. Every Sunday morning, beginning at 9 a.m., thanks in part to the Whispering Dragon Center in Shoreline, we cover the world of animals. This week, it's Shelter Rescue Sanctuary and anything that helps our animal friends Sunday. We'll check in with Meow Cat Rescue, Help Animals India, and Animals24-7.org. Plus, we'll find out about all the great events and classes coming up at the Ananda Institute for Living Yoga. Hope you can join us for Martha Norwalk's Animal World, Sunday morning, 9 a.m. to noon, right here on Alternative Talk, AM 1150.
Exploring new territory every day. This is Alternative Talk 1150.
Hello, everybody. We're back again. This is here what's going ahead. There'll be 3 wonderful new events with Jupiter Fire trine Saturn with Dr. Laura Tad, who's been away and back again to share her valuable thoughts. And then, of course, the next new moon after the 2 of the eclipses that Amanda and I have shared, following the fall equinox. And then here's a list of what else might be of importance to you. But getting back to our focus, I just want to bring up that before we get into 68, which is right here in front of you on the slides, but that the dress apparel had changed greatly because of going to work. Women got rid of their corsets. Men had to dress more basic to go to factories. You know, there was a larger middle class that we were establishing, which was very important for the creativity and the strength of our nation, because of our common ground, you could say, of our identity. And that has been our identity. It is something to really consider as we move forward, all these thoughts of where we came from. It's good to know where we came from and what built us as far as conceptual ideas. And at that time in 1908, when Jupiter was trine, just as it is right now, this for 2026, when we're having this square between Saturn and Mars, Saturn's also over here trining with Jupiter. That wasn't the case all in between these other years. In fact, that optimism that people felt so much in 1908 when there was new events and opportunities, what was a depression became really cautious, a lot of cautious, and survival, much survival basis. So here we are moving into the next 30 years, 1968. And of course, that is just a few years after the pivotal conjunction between Pluto and Uranus in Virgo. And here in 68, though, things are popcorning, you could say. The Civil Rights Act, 1968, prohibited housing discrimination. Now that, if anything is Mars in Cancer. It is your home, the sacred spot, the one that we left from 1908, that slowly we're trying to return and people are able to have on new scales. But our sense of adventure and direction went to the moon. And here, this is Earthrise. This is that picture that Arlen that took when he saw it. That changes how we think of the world as our home. You know, that reality that we share this together. It was brutal. There were things cut off. There were assassinations. You know, it cheers me up. I lived during all this era. And the civil rights, Martin Luther King, I remember being in San Diego and demolished through that news. And then Robert F. Kennedy, who was a presidential candidate, I had in San Diego, had been driving through. I was up high looking and he was shot. It was just too quick, too much. The grief that everybody felt. But, and then of course there was we were in a war. It wasn't prefacing, leading up to a war, we were in one. And events there shifted so dramatically that there had been favor thinking it was going to end because Kennedy was going to end it. But Johnson, no, he had other ulterior motives and it was a kicking ball and he just extended it. So there was a lot of protest all around the globe. It wasn't just the United States. And you could call that between this dynamic of people saying, hey, this is what I want. This is my freedom. This is my direction that I see as important, and we're going to get it. And here, because there was by this time more connections, you know, just with life itself. So there were global protests. And it was repressed government. It was from Mexico, Brazil, Spain, Poland, Czechoslovakia, China, West Berlin, Rome, London, Paris, Italy. And they say many American cities, but it was Los Angeles is one that totally denoted because they had a Latino group there. 1,200 kids walked out in school trying to get very reasonable things with the high school. And remember, that was something that kids used to have to work at all across any nationality. They worked when they came here as kids. But then by 38, there were laws, you go to school. Well, here the schools are saying, wait a minute, we need to have representation, many factors. You can read about it. And then Argentina as well. In Toulouse, France, this is big news when you Google it, that 10 million workers, that's 2/3 of the workforce, for over a month struck. Charles de Gaulle could hardly get his act together. He finally did, it seems, whether it was for good or bad. But the students and the workers just said, nope, we're going to have a change. What else? So here we go from a breakdown to a breakthrough. It's always that element of life and rebirthing. 1996, the Federal Communications Commissions passed a law. This was Clinton that did this. Communications Decency Act and the Telecommunications Act. It had better intentions. I remember they broke up Ma Bell, I think it was. But the companies didn't compete like they thought. And instead, they just ate each other up and they became one mega thing. So we don't really have the competitiveness that was talked about, that everybody thought, whoop-de-doo. At any rate, there were other, but it did birth the internet, which has been, of course, as we know, that channel direction, which is changing life forever. We're at that cusp now, heading forward. But some of the things between women, you know, they shifted the skirts, they went to work, they liberated in a sense. Really, that was a defining factor, was also saying, hey, I'm going to go to more school, not just your school, high school. I'm going to be a person. And I'm also going to take the technological advancements and not just have to raise children, which of course women many times want to do in some ways, not always. I'm not saying that at all, please. But I'm saying that I'm not taking it away from women that want to either. Okay. But the sense of identity with womanhood really launched and had a mobilizing force. Whereas for the men, it wasn't quite so clear. They were still, at this point now in time, they're really working there's still a polarity between working with self-help groups to to allow emotions, because society is still stuck on, hey, you've got to support and you've got to muster up and produce. Whereas the woman can, coddle the kid, even though during this year, men came to the forefront and raised children and said, yeah, I'll be your partner. I'll help out. And that is part of our legacy, thank goodness. But here, what I'm driving at is that the Olympics, astounding. They call it the Miracle 7. There were gymnastics and they won gold. The basketball, also gold. And this sent a message forward that now we're beginning to reap. Simone, the great gymnast, I guess, said that she had their picture up on the wall as a kid and said, yeah, I want to be one of these ladies, these women, these people. So identity is always crusading, and is to protect who we are. So the sensitive man in this day and age is where the men are coming back around saying, you know what, women, you can't be equal unless we're equal too. And I'm glad you're doing great, but hey, we're going to meet you on grounds, and it's one for all, and, et cetera. And there's many groups and et cetera. There's a swing back on the other side because there's always a shift, and we're in a big transition. But I wanted to bring that up, not just that for the one. And children, because of the internet, are so aware of global issues that it's rather astounding. You hear the news and sometimes you think they're parroting, but not really. There are kids that are taking activating choices through maybe some guidance, that's Saturnian guidance, to say, hey, here's a structure, but leading, whether it's collect all the shoes and send them somewhere or get bicycle parts to help fix for places. But it's astounding. It's just literally astounding. Great intelligence. So back to 1996, the internet, it boomed. The website came alive. Space totally eliminated. Talk about those borders that were fixed with Saturn. Time said, I think we'll shift our ideas. Maybe we'll think a little bit like Einstein. It's the huge world out there. And we're going, time is relative. And I've thought long and hard about that. When you're going someplace, it's slow, it's new, everything is experience, you're getting in all this data. When you return, it's like, dip, 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 much shorter. And that's because it's actually relative, the meaningfulness of it. It's meaningful. And then again, we know with quantum that we change literally the sense of time. There's so much that we try to understand through some kind of defined definition, but yet there's a latitude of transition. And I suppose in Cancer, with all its phases, that's something to realize. But there's tools. The internet brought in all these wonderful tools, Photoshop and music. People could create at the drop of a hat, just doink. It may not be the most elegant. And is it honest? Is it within themselves? Is it something deep, or is it just something on the surface that they're just offering? That's something that Saturn is concerned about in Aries, that your direction is truly forward in that sense of your truth, you could say. And that you recognize as others are moving in their direction too. And together we're trying to activate something that protects all of us. It's a tall order. We're not hardly there. We have other cycles that say, oh, it's going to be a longer time, of course, but there's little incremental steps. And that's all that we can attach ourselves to. Well, moving forward, we now, with that internet, have all these streaming over-the-counter platforms. Our home has absolutely shifted from where it was the integral center hub with our piano, everybody singing, where we worked, where we were earth-based, into this non-tactile cyberspace of no time, because you're talking to somebody in Tokyo or China or Australia or Africa, wherever it is, even across the United States. Like, I'm 6 hours different from the East Coast. It's been challenging. But with all of that, it's just adjustments. So we could entertain ourselves at home. In fact, people can be in the same home, all experiencing different culturally movies, right? Or documentaries or news or whatever it is that they want, meaning that their experience is different from the immediate people, but yet maybe it connects, or it does connect, with a broader sense of who our community is and who our family is. And that itself is extraordinary, that those differences that you might feel inherently within your own family are magnetized through. But then you have to remember that this year also has Jupiter in that trine. So we're not just talking about Saturn that's activating this, but we have that trine. And the trine is going to be 3 times. It's just the first time this weekend, and then it'll be next April and next July. So tune in to Laura. We'll talk about that. And women, here they go. There's sovereignty. And this is what we want for all people, that you trust yourself within. You're not asking for validation. You get feedback, that's one thing, but not confidence that to be who you are out of pure validation. That's a stepping stone, but you have acquired it out of trust because you know yourself and you know how to make choices when they come up. And also, you're without blame, because you're taking accountability, that accountability of Saturn within ourself, that is the final resting spot, is so powerful. So here you have a whole, it's AI that I did, but I love the fact that and I asked for people of all descriptions and ages, and we have a representation of that in some city that has its street fairs or its vendors, and it's paved, and there's a bicycle still, and new birth. I hadn't asked for that, but come to think of it, with the Leo. So somehow all of this is going to work with the child. We'll have to wait and see where the child comes up. But it can be your personal creativity. You know, our personal creations are our children. So we've moved from the chaotic 1968 conflict into that 1996, just to go back a little bit, of the prosperity that we had. But then we had the boom, the .net crisis that dropped because it wasn't grounded. And that is one of the dilemmas we have in 2026, is that there's all these ideas and concepts, but how do we find, feel them, touch them? There is this other drive from our secluded little personalized hyper world to reach out and to connect with people, you know, because we do have all of these ways of moving. We've actually moved away from the home where we had to walk from into the car that was combustion, you know, with gas in it. That now we're moving away from the gas into electrical cars, although they're terribly expensive. In fact, any car is terribly expensive these days. So we've got urban transportation, you know, with buses, trams, whatever you call it, subways, besides the air, that are moving people about in this world of ours. So this digital world that we have is being totally reshaped. You know, the car reshaped our physicality, as I was going back to, with the home extending outward, and then with the paved roads to extend and extend, to get to work, to be able to go to the movies, really have entertainment, be the spectator that we suddenly loved, and for also enjoyment and for escape. You know, it's many many facets rolled into it. But it's also the physicality moved from still tactile places into this home environment where we're secluded. We're by ourselves in a sense, even though we might be with other people, because they're all experiencing their own thing. That we need to find that bridge. Yeah, it's the most fascinating idea that we move to the car, away from the car, from the home, back into the home, but reincorporating how we experience it. So really looking at that, I'm repeating myself with this question there, because it's a very fascinating time that we have that really asks us to be that self, that truest, most honest part of ourself, without asking for validation, but with the understanding and care and love that how seeing it in relationship with what we are working within and people, of course, that's really the strength of it. And taking into account the men, the women, the children, the ages, the countries, the nations. We live in a complex world, and it's a beautiful time that way, where we can work together under this canvas of the sky, that really is a globalizing in many ways, yet strangely focusing within. But we have these dynamics that are happening. So I hope that this overview, which is sort of a segue in between, gives good food for thought, because it's busy times. I know myself, we've been active with this program, trying to coordinate agendas between vacations and busyness. But I guess that's really a way with the eclipse season too, which extends itself to say, you got to reset. You have to really take stock and know where you honestly are going, and what are you protecting? Is it something really important to your heart's mission and to the people that you love, and nurturing who you need to be and want to be and going forward? Because we have a flowing energies that want to manifest with that Leo that will happen progressively. We have a chance to put form to something and then review it and do more form. Yeah. So the internet, we are going from the earth to the air, but we're connected. We know that. And I think that's also where this is a consciousness that's telling us it's not just what you touch, it's larger. Our thoughts matter. I know I get into this, but I'm learning it because in my own life, I realize if I'm the master of my own ship, of my fate, there's that poem that captain of my ship, master of my fate, it matters what I'm thinking. And we have all this energy in air right now that is changing, mobilizing the moment, our connections, our words. And so how I talk to myself is a matter. And that's how I ground. You have to ground. Okay. I hope everybody leads some personal way of experiencing their mission that they find, their joy, because it is involved with Leo that says, is this giving me life force? Life force wants to love, wants to embrace and experience. And you can have both a moment of grief and a moment of joy. You can hold those things together. I think we've talked about that too. And I think also to be sensitive that it's not the same for everybody. We're all living so many different trajectories of this experience on the globe. But if we listen, as I always say, and remember, then we can begin to allow other people their validity, their recognize. Because oftentimes with Gemini anyway, when we have Uranus and Gemini needs to speak. They need to sound it out and then, hey, I got it. And I'm going forward. So with Mars, you can protect your egg of consciousness and share it on many dimensions. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for joining this vibrant conversation on Talk Cosmos. Every week, Sue Rose Minahan and her guests explore life's deeper meanings through astrology's energetic patterns. If you loved today's episode, hit like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. And join us next week, same time, same place, as we continue our journey together through the roots of the cosmic pathway.